Welcome, anointed ones, to God Connection. Every great spiritual awakening begins with a betrayal. You were never meant to survive this, chosen one. Let that sink into your spirit for a second. You didn't just stumble into another hard season. You just walked, headfirst, into a divine revelation that was disguised as demonic warfare. And what you uncovered wasn't random bad luck. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a full-scale, strategically planned demonic plot. It was written, rehearsed, and scheduled to collapse you completely before you ever realized the power you were becoming. Here's a hard fact, a truth most people don't want to hear. Spiritual warfare doesn't announce itself with thunder, lightning, and a demon manifesting in your room. It shows up wearing your friend's smile. It comes packaged in your coworker's concern. It echoes in your own doubts, amplified in your head at 3 in the morning. The battlefield isn't some distant, abstract place out there. It is often hidden in the daily routines, the relationships, and the thought patterns that look too normal to question. You weren't paranoid. You were perceptive. You started noticing the patterns, didn't you? The sudden, inexplicable chaos that erupted right before a major breakthrough. The way your energy would drain after a specific phone call. The way your peace became suspiciously expensive the moment you started walking in your God-given purpose. That's not bad luck. That is backlash. And let's be real. At first, you absolutely thought you were overreacting. You tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'm just tired. Maybe I'm just imagining things. Maybe I'm being too sensitive. No, you weren't imagining anything. You were detecting frequencies that others are too spiritually numb and distracted to notice. Think of yourself as heaven's undercover agent who accidentally overheard the enemy's group chat. It's almost funny when you think about it. They spent so much time plotting in secret, whispering in the shadows, and God, in his infinite wisdom, let you discover the entire script before the show even began. That's why your discernment started spiking, seemingly out of nowhere. That's why your gut feelings became alarms. It was because heaven handed you the divine blueprint of your opposition. So now, this isn't just about surviving attacks anymore. This is about understanding the architecture behind them. Because once you know the system, once you see the pattern, you are no longer a target. You become a threat to every invisible hand that ever tried to write your downfall. Welcome to Revelation. You didn't just expose a plot. You exposed the full-blown panic of hell itself. 1. The plot was never random. It was a calculated reaction to your awakening. You didn't just wake up one day and find yourself under attack for no reason. The demonic assignment against you was activated the moment your spiritual awareness began to shift. The second you stopped being a sleeping giant, something ancient and territorial stood up to oppose you. The energy around you changed because your mind stopped functioning on autopilot. You started asking the dangerous questions. Why am I here? What is my true purpose? Why do these generational patterns keep repeating? You started setting boundaries. You started seeing through manipulation that had worked on you for years. And that simple act of waking up, that alone, was enough to trigger a coordinated, strategic, spiritual reaction. When a chosen one, an anointed one, starts to remember who they truly are in God, it's like setting off a piercing alarm in the unseen world. Forces that once felt comfortable controlling you, siphoning your energy, and keeping you in a box begin to panic. Why? Because their disguise no longer works. You stopped being predictable. Into the demonic realm, unpredictability is rebellion. The plot against you was never emotional. It was 100% strategic. The forces that opposed you had a file on you. They had studied your patterns. They knew your weaknesses, your triggers, your old habits. They knew exactly which distractions to send, which people to use as vessels, and which painful memories to resurrect, all just to slow you down. But here is what they didn't calculate. They never planned for your evolution. They criminally underestimated the quiet, internal transformation happening in your spirit. While they were still studying your old version, you were already downloading a new operating system from heaven. Every attack they launched was programmed for the person you used to be. The one who doubted themselves, the one who constantly tried to explain their worth, the one who still desperately needed external validation. What they didn't expect was your awakening to divine intelligence. You began to understand that not every loss was meant to destroy you. Some losses were divine extractions. Some losses were coded as lessons that taught you how to operate beyond emotional control. The entire demonic plot depended on your spiritual ignorance. But when the light of God's truth entered your understanding, their whole system of influence began to collapse. They had no new strategy. They were left scrambling, trying to use tactics that no longer worked on you. They never imagined you would rise in awareness this quickly. The truth is, they didn't attack you because of what you were doing. They attacked you because of what you were about to realize. You were getting too close to the truth that your power doesn't come from effort, but from alignment. You started to operate from divine timing instead of fear-based reaction. And that is what frightened them. When your spirit woke up, you became unprogrammable. You stopped running from warfare and started decoding it. You didn't just survive their plot. Your awakening exposed it, disarmed it, and turned their entire strategy into your greatest testimony. 2. The war was spiritual, camouflaged as psychological chaos. The attack against you didn't come with a clear sign, a label, or a dramatic, supernatural event. It came disguised as confusion. That is how spiritual warfare really works in this age. It's subtle. It hides behind emotions. It hides behind bad timing. It hides behind a string of chaotic events that seem ordinary until you start paying attention. The enemy, the demonic realm, couldn't reach your spirit directly. Your spirit is sealed by God. So it targeted the next best thing, your perception. It wanted to distort how you saw yourself. It wanted to twist how you saw your purpose. It wanted to, most of all, distort how you saw God. That's why you went through those agonizing seasons where nothing made sense, where it felt like you were losing your mind, breaking down, or going crazy. In truth, you weren't losing your mind. You were stepping into a deeper, more profound dimension of clarity, and the old was fighting the new. When your spirit began awakening, your mind became the battleground. The warfare wasn't about your body or your possessions. Those were just secondary targets. The primary war was for your awareness. The enemy knows that if it can confuse your thoughts, it can delay your destiny. It starts subtly, a seed of self-doubt that grows louder every day, an exhaustion that feels supernatural, a bone-deep weariness that sleep can't fix. People around you suddenly changing, becoming irritable or distant for no reason. Small inconveniences that multiply and stack up until your peace feels completely hijacked. All of this is strategic. The goal isn't just to stress you. The goal is to make you question what is real. Because if you stop trusting your discernment, you stop trusting your divine connection to God. They call it mental warfare because it operates like static interference on a radio. The more light you carry, the more you tune into God's frequency, the louder the enemy tries to make the static. That's why, right when you were growing the most spiritually, your anxiety spiked. Your sleep patterns were attacked. You started feeling disconnected from things and people that once felt normal. It wasn't that you were losing your balance. It was that you were being unplugged from the demonic systems, the matrix, designed to manipulate your mind. The chaos was the camouflage. The demonic realm thrives in distortion. It lives in the fog. It was hoping you would label your divine transformation as a mental breakdown. But what you were really experiencing was a holy dismantling of illusions. Every single thought that made you feel unworthy, unseen, or hopeless was a foreign voice trying to reclaim its territory. But it was through that mental fog that you began to recognize what was yours and what wasn't. That's when the power started returning to you, not in the form of control, but in the form of awareness. You began to separate the spiritual interference from your own inner, true voice. You stopped believing every single thought that entered your head. And in that moment, the enemy lost his disguise. What was meant to destroy your sanity ended up sharpening your discernment to a razor's edge. That's when the war started to lose. The moment you realized the confusion wasn't just chaos, it was exposure. 3. You were being studied like a code they couldn't crack. You were being studied long before you realized it. Every reaction, every emotion, every move you made was being monitored by forces trying to understand one thing. How did you still keep rising after everything they threw at you? How did you survive what was meant to bury you? They couldn't figure out why you kept healing faster than they could hurt you. That's because you weren't operating through normal, carnal logic anymore. Your spirit, your inner man, was functioning on divine intelligence. You became an unsolvable puzzle, a divine code to those who tried to control or break you. They tested you with everything in their playbook. They tested you with betrayal from those closest to you. They tested you with temptation. They tested you with crushing loneliness and suffocating distractions, just to observe what would finally make you fold. But nothing worked. Not permanently. Every attempt to decode you only exposed how protected you truly were by God. When you are chosen, your life becomes a study for both heaven and hell. Heaven watches to guide your evolution. Hell watches to interfere with it. The demonic system functions like a dark data collection agency. It analyzes your patterns to exploit them. But there was something in you, a divine spark, an anointing, that they could not access. Your inner command. You were born with a spiritual encryption from God Himself, one that blocks dark interference from fully hijacking your destiny. That's why they could observe your actions, but they could never truly understand your intentions. They could read your pain, but they could not access your purpose. They could replay your history, but they could never predict your next move. What confused them the most was your supernatural ability to turn suffering into strategy. Every single time they thought you were finished, down for the count, you reappeared. And not only did you reappear, you came back with more wisdom, more calm, and more strength than before. They could not replicate that. It's one thing to survive trauma. It's another thing entirely to extract revelation from it. You were supposed to break and lose your direction. You were supposed to become bitter and curse God. But instead, you used the pain as raw material for your spiritual evolution. That is what made you so dangerous. You became unpredictable in a world that depends on predictability. Eventually, they realized they couldn't control what they couldn't understand. They couldn't hack a system that was protected by divine, heavenly design. Your intuition, your gut feeling, began working like a divine firewall. It started warning you before the traps appeared. It started steering you away from disguised destruction. And that's when the tables turned. You stopped being their experiment, and you became their exposure. The same way they studied you, heaven used your endurance to study them. You didn't just survive their observation. You revealed their weakness. They cannot decode what is divinely encrypted. You were never meant to be understood by darkness, only revealed by the light. 4. The attacks came through familiar vessels, because strangers can't access you. This is the most painful part of spiritual warfare, the part that brings the most tears. You realize that the most damaging attacks didn't come from your declared enemies. They came through the people you cared about. They came from inside the house. That's what makes it so disorienting. A stranger on the street could never reach you. Your walls were too high for that. Your spiritual guard was up. So the enemy, in his cunning, went for proximity. He targeted the people inside your circle, the ones with emotional clearance, the ones who had access to your heart. The devil doesn't need to fully possess someone to use them. He just needs them to be distracted, insecure, jealous, or spiritually open, unguarded, enough to be influenced. That's how people who once loved you, people who you know loved you, started acting out of character. They started saying things that pierced you in ways no outsider ever could. It wasn't always their conscious intention, but their unguarded energy became a doorway for manipulation. That's why this betrayal feels spiritual, because it is. The enemy understands energy transfer better than most people. He knows that access equals influence, and influence equals opportunity. So, instead of attacking you directly, which he knew would fail, he poisoned the atmosphere around you. He whispered into the ears of those you trusted the most. He amplified their fears, their jealousies, or their confusion, and he turned those emotions into tools against you. And because the attack came wrapped in the voice of a loved one, in the package of familiarity, you didn't see it coming. It felt personal, when in reality, it was tactical. The hardest part of your journey was learning to separate the vessel from the voice. You kept trying to fix relationships that were being spiritually tampered with. You kept apologizing for reactions that weren't even your fault. You kept trying to explain yourself to people who were not in their right mind. But what you were really doing was fighting an invisible manipulation using emotional logic. And it was never going to work. It took divine discernment from God to finally realize that some of those arguments, those cold silences, those misunderstandings, they weren't even human-originated. They were spiritual distractions, strategically designed to drain your peace and get you off mission. The enemy knew he couldn't defeat your faith directly, so he attacked it through your affection. He targeted your loyalty because he knew you wouldn't easily turn away from people you loved. He wanted you exhausted, questioning your own intuition and doubting your ability to sense truth. But that is also where your greatest awakening came. You began to recognize the patterns. You noticed how your energy dropped around certain people. You noticed how confusion always followed specific conversations. You noticed how your peace left the room after particular interactions. That awareness broke the pattern. You learned that discernment doesn't mean judging others. It means protecting your assignment. You stopped resenting the people and started recognizing the spirits that were influencing them. You didn't harden your heart. You strengthened your boundaries. The same familiarity that was once used as a weapon against you is now your greatest wisdom. You no longer fear closeness. You just keep it spiritually clean. 5. The plot was not to kill you. It was to make you renounce your purpose. This is the core of it all. The real agenda behind every attack was never your physical destruction. It was your spiritual surrender. They didn't need you physically gone. They needed you spiritually disconnected. Death would have been too easy, too final. What they wanted was something far more sinister, for you to give up on yourself. The entire strategy was built around exhaustion, confusion, and emotional erosion. It was slow-burn warfare, designed to make you question the very purpose that makes you so powerful. If they could just get you to say, maybe I'm not chosen, or maybe I just made this all up, or this is too hard, I quit. That tiny moment of doubt, that renunciation, would have been enough to short-circuit your divine authority. Every hardship you faced was crafted to feel endless, personal, and unfair. Not because life hated you, but because darkness was desperately trying to rewrite your narrative through despair. It wanted you to believe that your calling was actually a curse. The goal wasn't to destroy your body. It was to make you, of your own free will, spiritually hand over your crown. That's why the trials came one after another, with no time to breathe. That's why certain people betrayed you in ways that made absolutely no logical sense. It wasn't random. It was a coordinated push to make you speak defeat into your own destiny. They couldn't take your power. They needed you to revoke it yourself. The most dangerous kind of spiritual warfare is the kind that feels like fatigue. It's not loud or dramatic. It's subtle, quiet, and persistent. It shows up as burnout. It shows up as compassion fatigue. It shows up as deep doubt and hopelessness. It shows up as the question, what's the point? That question, that is the battlefield. Because the moment you answer that question with hopelessness, the mission is compromised. You were being tested in the silence. Not to prove your strength to God. He already knew your strength. You were being tested to reveal to darkness that your faith cannot be negotiated. You survived, not because you had all the answers, but because something in you, the Holy Spirit, refused to quit. Even when you doubted, you didn't deny your purpose. Even when you were angry at heaven, you never signed away your calling. That is what they couldn't predict, that your ultimate surrender would only ever belong to God. They could not manipulate that kind of holy loyalty. So, every plan they made, every plot they hatched, eventually turned on them. What was meant to drain you, trained you. What was meant to silence you, shaped your voice. You didn't lose your faith. You confirmed it. 6. You were the experiment that backfired. They thought breaking you would be easy. They looked at your kindness and mistook it for weakness. They looked at your empathy and mistook it for fragility. They assumed that if they just piled enough pain on you, you'd lose your direction, curse God, and crawl back into compliance. You were their experiment. You were the one they wanted to study, control, and condition into silence. Every setback was meant to rewire your confidence into anxiety. Every betrayal was designed to lower your vibration into bitterness. And every disappointment was crafted to make you question your worth permanently. But what they didn't calculate, what their demonic computers could not process, was the divine chemistry that happens when a chosen one suffers. Pain doesn't paralyze you, it upgrades you. Instead of programming you into submission, the suffering activated a higher form of intelligence inside of you. It unlocked a level of discernment that even they couldn't decode. They expected your mind to shatter under the pressure. But all that pressure did was force you to access the deeper, stronger, wiser parts of yourself. You started noticing patterns. You started decoding motives. You started reading energy without needing to hear a single word. The very same pain that was supposed to make you helpless trained your discernment. They wanted to break your spirit, but instead, they trained your intuition. You became hyper-aware, spiritually alert, emotionally untouchable. Every betrayal turned into insight. Every rejection became a revelation. Every loss became a key that unlocked something divine and powerful inside you. They called it failure. Heaven called it initiation. Because while they were watching to see you collapse, God was watching to see you transform. The trap became your classroom. The trauma became your teacher. You weren't being punished. You were being prepared. You learned how to survive in an energetic environment that was designed to destroy you. And that gave you authority in realms they can no longer access. What was meant to humiliate you ended up validating your anointing. Now, you see through things instantly. You no longer chase validation or explanations. You walk differently. You speak differently. You discern differently. Because the fire rewired your entire operating system. They cannot manipulate you anymore. Why? Because you know how their tactics feel before they even unfold. You became the living, breathing proof that their system of destruction does not work on divine beings. You didn't escape their experiment. You outgrew it. They built the perfect trap to study your weakness, but what they accidentally created was the perfect environment that revealed your divinity. You were the test that rewrote the rules. A divine interruption. If you are feeling this message in your spirit, if you recognize yourself in this story, if you feel that divine upgrade and that rewiring happening in you right now, then this is your confirmation. This is your moment. You are not alone, and you are not crazy. You are awakening. Here at God Connection, this is what we do. We decode the warfare, and we announce the victory. If this is your first time here, or if you've been listening for a while and haven't made it official, I invite you to hit that subscribe button right now. Join this family, this army of anointed ones who are rising together. And if this ministry, if God Connection, is feeding your spirit and giving you the language for your victory, I want you to consider sowing a seed. This is not a requirement, but an opportunity. There is a super thanks button right below this video. If you feel led, consider sending a $10 donation or any amount God places on your heart as a prophetic act of faith. It's an act of declaring that your old season is over and you are stepping into your new, upgraded, powerful self. Your support helps us keep this light shining and reach more souls who are still trapped in the plot. We are grateful for you. Now, let's continue. 7. Hell needed your reaction more than your defeat. This is a high-level secret of spiritual warfare. Hell was never after your destruction. It was after your reaction. That's the part most people miss. Darkness doesn't gain energy from winning. It gains energy from being noticed. It feeds on engagement. The moment you engage with it emotionally, with rage, with deep fear, with defensive explanations, you start feeding it spiritually. That's why chaos was constantly sent your way. Not because they could beat you, they can't, but because they needed you to participate. They needed you triggered. They needed you defensive. They needed you angry. They needed you over-explaining and justifying yourself. They needed you fearful. Your reaction was their fuel. But the day you stopped responding from carnal emotion and started moving from divine awareness, the whole demonic structure began to collapse. It wasn't your silence that stopped them. It was your understanding. You learned that not everything deserves a reaction, especially when reacting means lowering your vibration to meet darkness on its own level. You stopped explaining yourself to people who were never listening for truth anyway. You stopped retaliating when people twisted your words or played the victim to get your attention. You realized that peace is not passivity. Peace is power that no longer leaks. The more you stayed composed, the more the enemy panicked, because they depend on chaos to confirm their own relevance. When you stopped feeding the drama, it started to starve. The devil's biggest delusion, his greatest lie, is making you believe he still has control. That's why distractions multiply the moment you're about to level up. It's not because he can stop the blessing. It's because he hopes you'll react and delay it yourself. Once you learn to observe the storm without emotionally entering it, you broke the entire cycle. You became a mirror that reflected their own manipulation back to its source. Your calm became a weapon. Hell does not know what to do with someone who refuses to perform. When you don't panic, when you don't argue, when you don't beg, you strip darkness of its entertainment. You started operating from awareness instead of impulse. And that is what made you untouchable. Your growth exposed their dependence on your emotional energy. Every time you chose peace over provocation, every time you chose light over bitterness, they lost another grip on your timeline. They wanted your energy, not your end. They wanted you angry, drained, and reactive because reaction keeps you in bondage. But awareness sets you free. And the moment you saw through the game, you stopped being a participant and became the observer. That's when hell started starving. Not because it lost, but because you finally refused to feed it. 8. The plot failed because you operate on a frequency they can't hear. The plot failed for one simple, profound reason. They built their entire strategy around the person you used to be. They studied your old triggers, your old fears, your old routines, and they designed an attack that could only work on your former self. What they didn't realize, what they could never understand, is that true transformation doesn't announce itself. It doesn't send out an email. It happens quietly. It happens internally. And it happens completely. While they were preparing to destroy a version of you that no longer existed, your spirit had already shifted dimensions. You had already evolved out of their reach. By the time they launched their plan, they were aiming at an outdated frequency. They had no idea that the pain they sent had already tuned you to a higher vibration. You weren't thinking the same. You weren't feeling the same. You weren't responding the same. You no longer moved through raw emotion. You moved through divine awareness. Their manipulation stopped working because it depended on your attachment to the old you. You used to chase closure. Now you choose clarity. You used to explain yourself. Now you observe. You used to overreact. Now you analyze energy. They mistook your new calm for weakness, not realizing it was the sound of your evolution. Demonic systems can only function within a very limited bandwidth. The frequencies of fear, anger, shame, and guilt. Once you, through your connection with God, rise above those vibrations, they lose access. It's like them trying to tune into a radio station that no longer broadcasts on that frequency. They can sense your presence, they can see your light, but they cannot read your signal. That's why their attacks started misfiring. The conversations that used to offend you no longer moved you. The insults that once hurt now sounded hollow. You stopped being emotionally programmable. Your awakening wasn't random. It was a divine interruption to a centuries-old system that depended on ignorance to survive. When you started questioning family traditions, when you started questioning generational pain, when you started questioning the strange patterns that seemed to repeat, failed relationships, sabotaged opportunities, emotional neglect, you were decoding ancestral encryption. You were tracing the fingerprints of a demonic system that thrives in familiarity. It wasn't about one attack or one event. It was about maintaining a pattern of bondage through repetition. That's how the unseen world keeps its contracts alive. Not through overt destruction, but through inherited dysfunction disguised as just how things are in our family. But you broke it. You started noticing what others tolerated. You started healing what others hid. You started naming what others normalized. That act alone shook centuries of spiritual inertia. Every time you chose awareness over autopilot, you disrupted the script. Every time you responded differently than your bloodline would have, you rewrote destiny. You didn't just overcome personal trauma. You ended a lineage of manipulation that relied on silence. The same energy that once whispered defeat into your ancestors met a different frequency in you. It met truth. And truth cancels illusion at the root. Your journey has never been just about your personal growth. It has been ancestral liberation in real time. You are the living proof that curses collapse when consciousness enters the room. The weight you carried, it wasn't yours alone. It was the accumulated residue of what generations before you couldn't confront. That's why your life has always felt heavier than your personal story explained. Because you were carrying spiritual debts you didn't create. And still, you broke them. You didn't just survive. You rewrote the prophecy that said your family line would never awaken. What once ran through your bloodline now ends with you. You exposed not just a plot against you, but a generational pattern that finally met its expiration date through your awakening. The revelation. Everything that happened, it wasn't random. It was revelation. You didn't stumble into warfare. You were chosen to expose it. What was meant to confuse you ended up confirming your divine rank. Every betrayal, every whisper campaign, every strange pattern of resistance, none of it was simply about an attack. It was about your initiation. You were being trained in spiritual intelligence. You were being molded to see beyond the surface. You were being sharpened into someone who can detect darkness, even when it hides behind a smile. You didn't just uncover a demonic plot. You dismantled a structure that had been feeding on silence, repetition, and unawareness for generations. Every time you refused to fold, you advanced the divine timeline. Every time you chose truth over comfort, the illusion lost another layer of control. What used to torment you spiritually now reports to you legally. You have outgrown the vibrational contract that once made you accessible to attack. You are no longer playing defense. You are the defense system. Discernment has become your shield. Awareness, your weapon. And your peace is your greatest retaliation. The enemy didn't just fail. It accidentally confirmed your identity. Because the intensity of the warfare always reveals the level of the purpose being protected. That's why your life has never fit the mold. You were never meant to survive quietly. You were meant to expose loudly. What they plotted in secret, heaven turned into your testimony. You have proven that divine favor doesn't just restore. It reverses the curse and rewrites the bloodline. Your journey wasn't punishment. It was prophecy in motion. Now you stand, not as the victim of an attack, but as the architect of awakening. You have decoded manipulation. You have transcended warfare. And you have reclaimed your spiritual sovereignty. You carry the receipts of divine vindication, the proof that light doesn't fight darkness. It simply makes it visible. That's why everything feels lighter now. The storm didn't end. You just rose above its reach. You are no longer who they planned against. You have evolved into who heaven always saw. So as you step into this next chapter, remember, revelation isn't just knowledge. It's ownership. You own your peace now. You own your purpose. You own your story. And that story is living proof that what was meant to destroy you was really just training you to see. If this message from God Connection spoke to your spirit, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Someone else might still be trapped in the plot you've already outgrown. Like this video. Leave your thoughts in the comments. And make sure to subscribe for more deep, brutally honest revelations like this one. You are walking proof that divine intelligence always wins. And your story is far from over. God bless you.